Hi, I'm Louise Messier, nutritional therapist, and I am working with Nurture Me Day Nursery to support them with some menu development, looking at the real importance of nutrition for early years growth and development, but also specifically in this video series, looking at nutritional considerations for autistic populations. So in this video, we're going to look at the routine and sensory experiences and any issues that there might be around the eating environment and food experiences, because for many children, it's the sensory experience of food that is a big factor in whether or not they are comfortable enough to eat and relax around food. We've looked through the video series at some of the underlying biological reasons that might make a child just too stressed to even enter into the notion of eating food. There could be something really deep rooted and biological going on in terms of their digestion that just is not going to have them comfortably sitting eating. We've looked at the other issues around the sort of stress and the anxiety linked to blood sugar regulation and the actual sort of more than fussy eating. We don't say fussy eating, and I often just have many deep rooted conversations about it's not fussy eating. So we've looked at those issues, but for many, let's not forget how important the sensory experience of food really is. The eating environment is what could be the final bit of whether or not they're actually going to taste the food or not, or enjoy the food or not. So the sensory environment is really important to a child. How they look, smell, taste, and feel, they're going to be really prone one way or the other as to the texture of food that they like. So children on the autism spectrum will often have a preference for either a very soft texture of food or hard and crunchy foods. The extreme nature of both of those have a limitation to muscle development. So both of them are not great, but the smooth foods in particular, they don't encourage obviously they're smooth, they just slither down the throat. They're not encouraging the chewing, and the chewing is what also encourages the same muscles that we use in speech. So if we do have children who are only liking the very soft, smooth, no lumps whatsoever, then that is going to have some issues around the muscle tone within the mouth, and that could have limitations for speech development. If we have the hard crunchy preference, that's more of a choking risk because they're hard and they're crunchy, and perhaps their mouth is not as developed with teeth as it could be to have a preference for those foods. So there's more of a choking risk with those foods. So both of them have their limitations, but it's worth bearing in mind that children will likely have a preference one way or the other. We may have children, and you'd be lucky to have children who are just happy to have foods of any texture, and that's marvelous because that obviously opens up a much wider range of foods. But generally there's a preference one way or t'other. Let's move down. So chewing fatigue, this is a real issue with children. If particularly with something like meat, if a child seems to have real trouble eating it, or they get fatigued, they seem to get really worn out when they're eating it. It could be that the muscle textures in the mouth have not been developed enough to actually help them to chew enough to eat it. And so they'll find it quite exhausting to try to eat that. So chewy food could lead to chewing fatigue. So avoiding the food is not going to increase the muscle tone. It's not going to help them to build upon that, to not get so fatigued. They're just going to get more and more fatigued because the muscles are not being developed. So helping to encourage more textures, different textures that encourage the chewing. Encourage chewing is really important because it stops them getting the chewing fatigue as much, because chewing fatigue will really only get worse. And as a child gets older and older and older, they can't just have the very smooth foods all of the time. Obviously, in some cases it's necessary, and there are different medical reasons why that might be the case. But generally we try to go through very smooth, slightly lumpier until we get to sort of a range of foods that can be chewed safely within children. So we need to create our safe foods and try and widen the safe foods. And obviously we've covered this in one of the videos. We don't say don't play with your food, because we know that children need to trust their food. So they need to touch it, they need to smell it, they need to feel it. And if they don't eat it, but they have touched it, that could be seen as progress. So we need to recognize that and encourage them to do that, to feel familiar with the food, to trust it, to be able to do that. And that might be enough to think, don't like the feel of that, I'm not going to eat that. Or that feels all right. I might try that. It might just say touching is really important, smelling is really important. Now, this is something that is quite important in terms of children within autistic populations. It's the sensory issue of interoception, and this is something that enables us to feel what's happening inside our body. It's referred to as the eighth sensory system, and all the hidden sense. It's just what kind of intuitively tells us something is going on. Intuitively tells us that we need to go to the toilet. Intuitively tells us that we are hungry or thirsty. Now, what's interesting with autism is that children don't necessarily feel hunger or thirst, because interoception can be impaired with children with autism. So they don't feel hungry. So when we feel hungry, being offered food is a welcome thing, because, oh, thank goodness, I was getting really hungry, my tummy was rumbling. If you don't feel that, then being offered food can be quite stressful, because you're not feeling hungry. You don't biologically feel hungry. So therefore, being offered food is like, well, I'm busy, I don't want that. That's not something that's even featuring in my world right now. Thirst can be impaired as well. If we don't feel thirsty, that's even more dangerous, because we're not hydrating at all. So that can lead to issues like in the GI video, I talked about constipation being a common issue. If our interoception is impaired and we don't feel thirsty, we're not going to drink water. Therefore, that constipation is going to get worse and worse and worse. And there's all sorts of other issues, obviously, that come with being dehydrated. But recognizing that children might not feel hungry or thirsty is really important, because how do we work with a child who physically doesn't feel hungry? We have to make food an experience. We have to make food a welcome activity. We have to make them, we might not make them feel hungry, but we have to make them want to try the food. So it's really hard, isn't it, when we have children who don't eat anything, and they go for a long time without wanting food, and we don't want to force it on them, because we know that that's going to exacerbate stress. But we also can't let children go for very, very long periods of time without having anything, particularly water. If a child is going a very, very long time and they're just not interested in food, and they're just not eating, they eat nothing in the day with you, then that is a different conversation. That is a different conversation. If that goes on for a repeated time, that will need medical intervention. The child may need some level of supportive nutrition to go with that nutritional growth and development, then, if they're literally not having any food. But we can't force children. If they go a few hours, that's fine. Sips of water is important, but if they go a few hours without food, that's fine. But safe food is better than nothing. So having some safe foods that we can go to, even if they are beige, even if they are nutrient devoid, we need to have those safe foods, because they will at least start to maybe tickle the taste buds, activate a hunger response, get the child thinking eating is safe, and that could help to broaden the range of safe foods further down the line. So we know that we need to have the preferred safe foods available, but we know that we can't overgive the safe foods, because then they'll just feel full from the safe foods and not even be interested in trying any of the other foods. And we do need to try to get them to try the other foods to broaden the nutritional intake that they have. Structure and routines is key in terms of the desire for familiarity. So we need to make sure that things are, as much as possible, the same as they can be day to day, week by week, so that there is a pattern to behaviors around food, and it's not just all of a sudden we're all going to go and have lunch over here under this tree, because that could be a shock and a change. And whilst it might be a lovely thing that you think we're going to go and have lunch under the tree, and it might be lovely for 70% of the children, for 30% of the children, it could be really terrifying to have that change. So if we're going to have lunch under the tree, plan it. I know that's really hard with weather, but kind of plan it. Think, well, shall we have lunch under the tree one day? This is what it could be, rather than just impose it on children in the here and now. If they feel involved in the decision to have lunch under the tree, it will not be as stressful. Otherwise, routine and structure is really important. So feeling the same, it's safe. It's a desire for familiarity. It feels safer. Therefore, I feel safer. I'm more likely to eat some food. I spoke about the transitional activities. I'm busy doing this. I'm now being told to go and eat. That can be quite stressful. The transitional song, the music, the story, there could be anything just to get from this to food without sort of heightening a stress response. So if things are the same, as much as can be, if things are the same, it will be less stressful for the child. Routine steps that are kind of commonplace with this is to have a weekly menu and have it visible. I would recommend not having photos because it's very hard to get the food to look exactly like the photo. And if it doesn't, that's creating a mistrust. Well, that's what it said it was going to be, and it isn't. It might be the same dish, but it might look different because it's very hard when we're not a restaurant to create the same looking dish every time. We might have a slight change and it might look slightly different, but that will be quite stressful for a child. So a weekly menu is great to be visible in terms of today we're having fish pie and tomorrow we're having chicken curry, etc., but not to have a picture of it, because if it doesn't look the same, it won't be eaten. We can have pictures of snacks. That's different because snacks will be more set. So we can have pictures of drinks and pictures of snacks. Cups of water in, that's fine. Pictures of snacks is fine because we can familiarize ourselves with those foods. So pictures of foods is important, but not pictures of the meals, because we cannot replicate the meal to be exactly the same each time. Pictures of a picture of banana, picture of, that's all fine. That's creating familiarity, etc., but we don't want to have pictures of the meals because we're creating a rod for our own back. Ensuring the transition to meal and snack time is comfortable for the child. We've covered that. There needs to be some form of transitional activity. If they usually have a green cup and the green cup is not available, don't just offer them a yellow cup, because that could be really stressful for the child and it might completely put them off the whole notion of sitting down to eat or having anything to eat or drink that day. And some children may prefer to eat with their hands, which we need to encourage and recognize and enable them to do that so that they feel safe with the food. Breaking the routine. It's really, really hard to encourage a child who has become stressed to get them to eat. And if you feel surely you must be hungry and you feel anxious yourself because you think, I need to get them to eat something, I can't possibly tell mum that they've had nothing to eat today. I can't possibly let them go home having had nothing to eat. I feel really responsible that they must be hungry. The child may be hungry, but if they are stressed, they're not going to eat anything. They are going to shut down that hunger response because they are feeling so anxious and they're not going to eat. So in the here and now, food is not going to happen. Cope with the emotion first. Calm the situation down. If the situation is calmed, then at some point, away from other children, because we don't want to encourage an extra snack for those who've already eaten, but try to get the child to then have a safe food, have something so that they're breaking the period of not eating. But we don't want to then have everyone else going, oh, they've got that, can I have that? Because they don't need it. They've already had something, and children will mimic what others are doing. But we need to concentrate on this child. They couldn't eat them because they were too upset. We're aware they've not had anything. We're going to try and give them something and give them some sort of special treatment because they've not had anything. So that's important to kind of recognize individually so that they are not just having to have something at the time everyone else is having, because they're not going to, they've shut down their hunger. They're too stressed. They're not going to eat when they are stressed. So keeping food safe. It's really, really hard when we have a safe food, and it's really, really tempting to just think, right, they're really good at eating this. I'm going to just sneak this in there and they won't know. I'm going to put some extra veg in there. I'm going to sneak this in there, and it will enhance that safe food to be more nutritionally, sort of more of a nutritional boost. They're likely to recognize it. Their sensory awareness of foods is very high. They're likely to detect the deception, and that will ruin the safe dish for them. And it will also potentially ruin their trust with you. So we don't, as tempting as it is, I've fallen foul of this myself. As tempting as it is, we cannot try and sneak something into a safe dish and think we'll get away with it. We can offer it, but not the safe. Keep the safe food safe. Offer it into something else, sneak it into something else that they've not tried. So hidden veg is fine. We need visible veg as well, because children should eat visible veg, but hidden vegetables are fine. But don't try and do it with a safe food, because you don't want to contaminate the familiar food, and then the familiar food will not be safe anymore because it's not familiar, it's been tampered with. So we don't need that. Keep things safe. As I said, the same color plate, the same utensils, the same place. It's all the first predictor of whether the food is safe. If everything looks the same, if it feels familiar, then it feels safe. And it can be really frustrating to do that. And it can be really frustrating to stick with the same foods. But It's important to do that first and foremost, because at least then we're getting some food in. Then the second issue, and a crucially important issue, is how to broaden that range of safe foods. Safe foods come first, no matter how beige and nutritionally devoid they are, and then we broaden that with the more nutritionally boosting foods. We try and gradually get those in without contaminating the safe foods. So a whistle-stop tour there of food routines and sensory issues. I'm Louise Messier, working with Nurture Me Day Nursery on this Nutrition for Autistic Population support series.